Hello. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's always really such a privilege to get to speak to you, David. And so you'll forgive me if I'm just going to direct the conversation at our guest tonight and almost forget that all of you exist until the audience questions. We've been speaking about our books for many years now. And one of the things that I love about reading your books is that they always surprise me every single time. I always encounter the same depth and the same enormous intelligence in them and the same seriousness, but every time the form is different, something surprising happens. And I learned something new about you and also about what literature can do. And I felt that this book, A Horse Walks into it. Does it have an article in Hebrew?
A sus enter into a bar.
Right. Was surprising in many ways, but in another way, as I was telling you backstage, I thought, at last, yes, here is David's humor unbarred. And I think I've always thought of you as somebody who is very funny, and yet your books are so serious. And I thought, where did I get this impression of you as somebody funny? And I think, the humor is there in everything you write, but I've never seen you use it in this way. And I thought I would just read a little bit, first question I have for you. I think, a writer can use humor in a lot of ways, right? We use it to build tension, and then we use it to relieve it. And we also use it to really guide our readers to look at very, very difficult things when they don't want to look at them. And I think, there's that way in which humor, which is really acid, can dissolve a lot of numbness and get to something which is deeper, or get through apathy to a more raw feeling. But then, of course, humor, I think the way we think of it most readily is that it's used to entertain, right? Humor can be entertaining. But I think this question of how much or little it should do, whether humor should make us laugh or whether it should make us face something difficult, is really central in this book. So I want you to sort of set the book up a little bit and talk about how you thought of humor, the role of humor in this book.
So, shalom, first of all. I don't see you, but I take it that you are there somewhere. I mean, if someone can lower the light, I'm willing to confess everything without the torment. Okay? It is written, this book is written in a different voice than the others. I think first it is because I like to surprise myself. I like to write not in the way I know, but in the way I do not know. Because suddenly when the earth is moving under my feet, suddenly I'm more alert and I'm more creative. For years, really years, something like 24 years, I had the main idea of the story that is about a boy, an Israeli boy, Dovale, who is spending a week in a semi-military base in the south of Israel. And he is the only son of his parents, and it's a very strong triangle. He describes it as the Bermuda Triangle, that everyone who enters it dies. And they are very symbiotic, all the three. It's the first time he's leaving home for a week. And suddenly he is called immediately to come to the barrack of the commander of this camp. And he's told that there is a funeral in Jerusalem and he must be there until 4 o'clock. And in minutes, he's being taken to the tent where he's living, and he has to pack his belongings in one backpack, and he's put on a military car with a half-crazy military driver, and off he goes. And there is only one thing that nobody bothered to tell him: who died. And in these 4 long hours, he starts to feel that his parents are fighting within his brain, begging him to keep him or her alive. And he becomes like the judge and later maybe the executor of one of his parents. And I had the idea, as I said, for something like 24 years. And in these 24 years, whenever I finished a novel, I said, okay, now I'm going to write this story, because it haunted me. The fact that people could be so cruel, and maybe they were only indifferent. I think indifference is a very sophisticated way of cruelty. And they never bothered to think what he must have gone through in these hours, what they have not spared from him by just telling him who died, which will be harsh enough. But to trap him into this terrible existential dilemma, whom do you want to keep alive? Whom do you love more, Mama or Papa? That was unbearable. But I was unable to find a good way to tell the story. And you very much know that stories are not only about the what we tell, but about the how we tell. And also in your books, you try all the time to renovate and to create other genres of telling the story. And then suddenly it occurred to me, it came to me, this idea. And good ideas come, we don't know where they came. If I knew where good ideas come from, I would have sat there all day. But suddenly you have this sparkle, and you say, if Dovale tells his story to the most unlikely audience to accept his story, which will aggravate his loneliness, his solitude, his foreignness in every context of his life. And then I thought, what if he's a comedian who stands on stage and he starts the evening like stand-up comedy starts, the comedian flirts with the audience and teases the audience and humiliates the audience. And then something will happen in the story that makes another story, the real story of his life, erupt from him in a volcanic power that he cannot control. And he starts to tell this story about the trip, the 4 hours trip from the south of Israel to the funeral. And he tells it to an audience who, as I said, indifferent to his misery. They came only to wash their head, as we say in Hebrew, lishtof tarosh, after yet another heavy, traumatic week in Israel. They are not interested in the intimate stories and the intimate agony of the comedian. They want to be entertained, and suddenly he pours on them his story, but he knows it. He knows that he has to bribe them all the time and to attract them. So he gives them part of the story, and immediately he bribes them with another joke, and then another joke, and something witty and funny. And so all the evening becomes like a very thin, delicate equilibrium between the story that he must tell and the story that the audience wants to hear. And I realized that humor is a great way to convey it. Humor is a great thing to start with. I know I say something totally new here, but I think so often we see that when we are able to use humor, we are not victims of a situation. Even in death camps, people were able to use humor. And I think that by so doing for a minute, maybe, they uprooted themselves, they redeemed themselves from the tyranny of the situation. By the very ability that they had to change the point of view, suddenly they were not totally passive victims of the situation. Of course, they were victims, but they were able to move. They were more flexible for a second in front of the arbitrariness. They did not collaborate with arbitrariness. And not to collaborate with arbitrariness, even by the way of changing the point of view, is a great thing, I think. It's really a great achievement.
I thought also of the way in which the humor allows for a kind of attending to what is normally unutterable. There's this no holds bar in this atmosphere of this comedy club. And so it allows for looking at things and speaking about things in an atmosphere of honesty that rarely exists. We only allow it to exist in the context of humor. But therefore there's an opportunity for incredible nakedness and rawness. And from the very first moment that Dov walks onto the stage, we understand that this is somebody who's going to be undressing himself completely in front of us, the reader, in front of the audience as well. Yes, and he also plays on the eternal temptation of us humans to peep into the hell of another. It's an irresistible temptation. Only to peep, not really to look at, not really to become committed. When you look deeply in the hell of other, maybe, God forbid, you might become committed and might feel even responsible, and maybe you want to do something to ease the burden. But usually, and of course, especially in such circumstances of stand-up comedy, it's only the temptation, the sensational temptation to just, to taste a little of the agony of another human being and then to withdraw. And what he tries to do, what he yearns for the most, is that they will look more into him. The whole idea of an actor, I think, is of someone who wants to be looked at, after all, yes? And you know that in the story, Dovele invites his best friend from the age of 14, a friend who was with him in this semi-military base, and a friend who has betrayed him, and they never saw each other for 43 years, and suddenly Dovele wants him to come and to see, to look at him, to see him. Right, that's what I was going to say, which is it's not just that the audience is interested in the spectacle of seeing into the other's life. It's also that the spectacle himself, this comedian, needs the other. He needs the audience, but there's the collective audience, which over the course of the novel you make more and more and more individual, right? This series of characters begins to emerge out of what's first this just mass of people, but there's one within that audience and who becomes more and more individualized. There's one individual who is literally a judge. Yeah. And this is the childhood friend, Avishai. Who doesn't even remember Dov when he first gets the phone call. He can't place him. He's blocked him out completely from his memory. And Dov says to him, I want you to come. And he says, why? And he says, he's going to read it. He's going to do it. Maybe we should have him come out and do it. We have a reader who's going to read this part for us. Yeah.
He called me about 2 weeks ago at 11:30 at night. I had just come back from walking the dog. He introduced himself with a certain tense and celebratory anticipation in his voice, which I did not respond to. Confused, he asked if it was me and whether his name didn't sound familiar. I said it didn't. I waited. I loathe people who quiz me like that. The name rang a bell, but it was faint. He wasn't somebody I'd met through work. Of that I was certain. The aversion I felt was a different kind. This was someone from a more inner circle, I thought, with a greater potential for harm. Ouch, he quipped. I was sure you'd remember. He chuckled heavily, and his voice was slightly hoarse. For a moment, I thought he was drunk. "Don't worry," he says, "I'll keep this short and sweet." And here he giggled. "That's me, short and sweet. Barely 5'2" on a good day. "Listen, what do you want?" And there was a stunned silence. Then he asked again if it was me. "I have a request for you," he said, abruptly focused and businesslike. "Hear me out and decide. It's no big deal if you say no. No hard feelings. It's not something that'll take up a lot of your time. Just one evening. And I'm paying, obviously. However much you say, I won't haggle with you." I was sitting in the kitchen, still holding the dog's leash. She stood there, weak and sniffling, looking at me with her human eyes, as if surprised I was still on the phone. I felt oddly exhausted. I had a sense that there was a second muted conversation going on between me and this man, which I was too slow to pick up. He must have been waiting for an answer, but I didn't know what he was asking. Or maybe he'd made his request and I hadn't heard. I remember looking at my shoes. Something about them, the way they pointed at each other, brought a lump to my throat. He slowly walks toward a worn, overstuffed red armchair on the right side of the stage. Perhaps it too, like the big copper urn, is left over from an old play. He collapses into it with a sigh, sinks farther and farther down until it threatens to swallow him up. People stare at their drinks, swirl their glasses of wine, and peck distractedly at their little bowls of nuts and pretzels. Silence. Then muffled giggles. He looks like a little boy in a giant piece of furniture. I notice that some people are trying not to laugh out loud, avoiding his eyes, as though afraid to get mixed up in some convoluted calculus he is conducting with himself. Perhaps they feel, as I do, that in some way they already are embroiled in the calculus and in the man himself more than they intended to be. He slowly lifts his feet, displaying the high, almost feminine heels of his boots. The giggles grow louder until laughter washes over the entire club. He kicks his feet and flutters his arms as if drowning. He yells and sputters and finally uproots himself from the depths of the armchair, leaps up, stands a few feet away from it, panting and staring at it fearfully. The audience laughs with relief. Good old slapstick. And he gives them a threatening glare, and they laugh even harder. He finally deigns to smile, soaking up the laughs. That unexpected tenderness softens his face again, and the audience responds. The comic, the entertainer, the jester savors the reflection of his smile in the viewers' faces. For a moment, one can almost imagine he believes what he sees. But then, once again, as though incapable of tolerating the affection for more than a second, he stretches his mouth into a thin, disgusted line. I've seen that grimace before. Little rodent gnawing on himself. "I'm really sorry for bursting into your life like this," he said in that late-night phone call. "But I guess I was hoping that thanks to some, devotion of youth," he sniggers again. "After all, you could say that we started out together, You went your way and you did a great job. Big respect." Here he paused, waiting for me to remember, to finally wake up. He could not have imagined how stubbornly I was holding on to my comatose state, or how violent I could be toward anyone who tried to sever me from it. "It'll take me a minute to explain, tops. So worst case scenario, you've given me a minute of your life. Cool?" He sounded like a man my age, but he used a younger generation's slang. Nothing good was going to come for this. I closed my eyes. I tried to remember devotion of youth. Which youth was he referring to? My childhood in Gadara? The years when we moved around because of my father's business from Paris to New York to Rio de Janeiro to Mexico City? Or perhaps when we returned to Israel and I went to high school in Jerusalem? I tried to think fast and find my escape route. His voice told a sense of distress, shadows of the mind. "Look," he burst out, "is this an act? Or are you such a big shot that you won't even... How can you not remember?" No one had spoken to me like that for a long time. It was a breath of fresh air. purifying the disgust I felt toward the hollow deference that usually surrounded me, even 3 years after retiring. "How can you not remember something like that?" he kept fuming. "We took a class together for a whole year with that Kalchinsky guy in Beit Vegan. Then we used to walk to the bus together." It slowly started to come back. I remembered the little apartment, dark even at midday. And then I remembered the gloomy teacher, tall and thin and hunched, who looked like he was holding up the ceiling with his back. Then there were 5 or 6 of us boys, all useless in math, who came from a few different schools to take private lessons with him. He kept up a torrent of speech, reminding me of long-forgotten things. He sounded hurt. I listened, and yet I didn't. I lacked the strength for these emotional upheavals. I looked around the kitchen, seeing things I had to fix, or paint, or oil, or caulk. House arrest, as Tamara used to call the endless list of chores. "You blocked me out," he finally said, incredulous. "I'm sorry," I murmured. And only when I heard myself say it did I realize that I had anything to be sorry for. The warmth of my voice was revealing, and from that warmth there emerged a fair-skinned, freckled boy with splotches on his cheeks, a short, skinny boy with glasses and prominent lips that were defiant and restless, a boy who talked quickly and was always slightly hoarse. And I remembered instantly that despite his fair skin and pale pink freckles, his thick curly hair was jet black, a contrast of colors that had made a great impression on me. "I remember you," I exclaimed. "Of course. We used to walk together. I can't believe I could have..." "Oh, thank God," he sighed. "I was starting to think I'd made you up." "And good evening to the stunning beauties of Netanya," he bellows as he resumes his dance across the stage, clicking his heels. "You know, girls, I know you all too well. I know you from the inside." "What was that, table 13? You have some nerve, you know?" His face darkens for a moment. He seems genuinely hurt. "Hitting a shy, introverted guy like me with such an invasive question. Of course I've had Netanya women." He gives a full, round grin. "Beggars can't be choosers. Times were hard. We had to make do." The audience, men and women, slap their hands on the tables, booing, whistling, laughing. He crouches on one knee opposite a table of 3 bronzed, giggling old ladies with blue-tinted hairdos made up mostly of air. "Well, hello, table 8. What are you beauties celebrating tonight? Is one of you becoming a widow at this very second? Is there a terminal man taking his final breath in the geriatric ward as we speak? Go on, buddy, keep going." The imaginary cheers. He cheers on the imaginary husband. "One more push and you're free." The women laugh and pat the air with an affectionate scolding. He dances around on the stage and almost falls off the edge, and the audience laughs louder. "3 men," he yells, holding up 3 fingers. "An Italian, a Frenchman, and a Jew sit at a bar talking about how they pleasure their women. The Frenchman says, 'Me, I slather my mademoiselle from head to toe with butter from Normandy. And after she comes, she screams for 5 minutes.' The Italian says, 'Me, when I bang my senora. First of all, I spread her whole body from top to bottom with olive oil I buy in this one village in Sicily. And she keeps screaming for 10 minutes after she comes.' The Jewish guy's mute. Nothing. The Frenchman and the Italian look at him. 'What about you?' 'Me,' says the Jew. 'I slather my Golda with schmaltz, and after she comes, she screams for an hour.' 'An hour?' The Frenchman and the Italian can't believe their ears. 'What exactly do you do to her?' 'Oh,' says the Jew, 'I wipe my hands on the curtains.' Suddenly ravenous, I order a focaccia and grilled eggplant with tahini. 'Where was I?' he says joyfully, following my exchange with the waitress out of the corner of his eye. He seems happy that I ordered. 'The schmaltz, the Jew, the wife. We really are special people, aren't we, my friends? You just can't compare any other nation to us Jews. We're the chosen people. God had other options, but he picked us.' The crowd applauds. Which reminds me, and this is kind of a huge thing. That's what she said. I'm really fed up with the new anti-Semitism. You know, seriously, I was finally getting used to the old kind. You know, you could even say I was becoming ever so slightly fond of it. You know, with those charming fairy tales about the elders of Zion, the bearded old hook-nosed trolls sitting around together, munching on tapas of leprosy with cilantro and plague, exchanging recipes for quinoa braised in well poison, slaughtering the occasional Christian child for Passover. Hey guys, have you noticed that the kids are tasting a little astringent this year? Anyway, we've learned how to live with all that. We got used to it. It's like part of our heritage. But then these guys turn up with their new anti-Semitism, and I don't know. It doesn't sit well with me. I gotta say, I feel even a little aversion to it. He presses his fingers together and shrugs his shoulders with a genuine awkwardness. I don't know how to say this without offending the new anti-Semites, God forbid. But for fuck's sake, people, don't you think your attitude is just a little bit grating? Because sometimes I get the impression that if, let's say, an Israeli scientist came up with a cure for cancer, right? A medicine that would finish off cancer once and for all. Well, then I guarantee you the next day people all over the world would start speaking out, and there'd be protests and demonstrations and UN votes and editorials in all the European papers, and they'd all be saying, now, wait a minute, why must we harm cancer? What, and if we must, do we really need to completely annihilate it right off the bat? Can't we try and reach a compromise first? Why go in with force straight away? Why not put ourselves in its shoes, try to understand how cancer itself experiences the disease from its own perspective? And let's not forget that cancer does have some positives. The fact is, a lot of patients will tell you that coping with cancer made them better people. And you have to remember the cancer research led to the development of medications for other diseases. Are we just going to put an end to all that? And in such a destructive manner? Has history taught us nothing? Have we forgotten the darker eras? And besides, he adopts a contemplative expression. Is there really anything about man that makes him superior to cancer and therefore entitled to destroy it? The audience applauds sparsely. He charges ahead. And good evening to all the men. It's okay that you came too. If you sit quietly, we'll let you stay on as observers. But if you don't behave yourselves, we'll send you next door for chemical castration. Sound good? So ladies, allow me to finally introduce myself properly. Enough with the wild guesses. I know you're dying to learn the identity of this mysterious man of romance. Dovalaji's the name. It's the handle. It's the most successful brand in the entire enlightened world of the south of the Nile. And it's easy to remember. Dovale, short, long for dove, which is just like dove, except less peaceful. And G, like the spot, the apple of my dick. And ladies, I'm all yours. I am prey for your wildest fantasies from now until midnight. Why only midnight? I hear you asking sadly. Because at midnight I go home and only one of you beauties will be lucky enough to accompany me and become one with my velvety body for a night of intimacy, both vertical and horizontal, but mostly viral, and of course subject to whatever is made possible by the little blue pill of happiness, which gives me a few hours or borrows back what the prostate cancer stole. Open parentheses, such an idiot, that cancer, if you ask me. Seriously, thinking about it, I have such gorgeous body parts. People come all the way from Ashkelon to look at this work of art. Like my perfectly round heel, for example. He turns his back to the audience and waves his boot charmingly. Or my sculpted thighs, my silky chest, my flowing hair. But that degenerate cancer would rather wallow in my prostate. Gets a kick out of playing with my pee-pee, I guess. I was really disappointed in him, close parentheses. But until midnight, my sisters, we will raise the roof with jokes and impersonations with a medley of my shows from the past 20 years as unannounced in the advertisements. Because it's not like anyone was going to spend a shekel to promote this gig, except with an ad the size of a postage stamp in the Netanya Free Weekly. Fuckers didn't even stick a bill on a tree trunk. Saving your pennies, Yoav, God bless you, you're a good man. Picasso the Lost Rottweiler got more screen time than I did on the utility poles around here. I checked. I went past every single pole in the industrial zone. Respect, Picasso, you kicked ass. And I wouldn't be in any hurry to come home if I were you, take it from me. The best way to be appreciated somewhere is not to be there. You get me? Wasn't that the idea behind God's whole Holocaust initiative? Isn't that really what's behind the whole concept of death? The audience is swept along with him. Really, you tell me, Netanya, don't you think it's insane what goes through people's minds when they put up notices about their lost pets? Lost. Golden hamster with a limp in one leg, suffers from cataracts, gluten sensitivity, and an almond milk allergy. Hello? What is your problem? I'll tell you right now where he is without even looking. Your hamster's at the nursing home.
Thank you. Back to work.
Yeah. And because most of the novel is like that, I think, when you describe the origin of it, you describe really the very last bit of the novel and where the novel is driving toward, but without us knowing it. We don't really know for a long time where this book is going. All we know is that the comedian has called up the judge and asked him to attend, and what he said to him is, I want you to listen and to look. And to tell me afterwards what you see. And that's the request. And the rest of, from that moment on, we are engaged in this performance that Dov is giving. And as I was thinking about it, when you told the story, you basically began with the idea of his guilt, right? The fact that he, in a moment, believed he was deciding which of his parents would live or die. And so it makes perfect sense from that sense that he would ask the judge to come. But we don't know that. And when we're reading, we don't know that at all. We only know that he is asked to be seen. And as I was thinking about it, reading the book, I thought, isn't that what we all want as writers? I mean, in a sense, or all of us generally, don't we want to confess ourselves or to make ourselves, to undress ourselves in front of someone and say, what is it you see? What do you really see? And what is this thing that I can't control that comes out of me that you recognize as me?
Yeah, but in our profession, we are never present at the time of the reading. We are very lucky.
Yes.
I remember I was on a plane and there was a lady sitting just diagonally to me and she was reading my book and I looked at the amount of pages and I knew here she should laugh. And I was quite nervous and I felt in a kind of audition. And you are right, Dovale wants the judge to look at him and to tell him what radiates from him. And he says that over the years, even though he and the judge were not in any contact, Dovale kept reading the verdicts of the judge, and he noticed that the judge has the ability to, as he said, to grasp people from their roots. In one or two sentences, he gets their essence. And this is his wish, that the judge will come and look at him and just see the thing that Dovale cannot hide. Maybe because all his life Dovale is hiding, is camouflaging, is not living his real, authentic self, but something that is in parallel to his real self. I think we all know people like that, who you look at them and you feel that they are trapped in a mistake, in a huge mistake sometimes. Either it's a wrong choice of profession, it can be, or sometimes even a wrong choice of gender. You see that they should have been in another place, yet because of pressures of parents, expectations of teachers, of the surrounding, of the zeitgeist, they were led to choose the wrong choice for them. They wanted to satisfy someone else maybe. And you feel that they are living in parallel to their life. And yet, even when you live in parallel to your real, authentic self, the real, authentic self keeps sending pulses of memory, of insult maybe, of pain, for this deep missing of your life. And sometimes, if we are lucky, we get the chance, the rare privilege to unite again with ourselves, as it happens, I believe, to Dovele in the end of this story. And because of this sense that Dovele has that he is not in his right element, as can be said, that he is not really himself, that even his profession, this stand-up comedy, these layers of rudeness and vulgarity and aggression that he has to put upon himself in order probably to protect a very delicate, vulnerable inside. And he believes that if the judge looks at him, he will be able to give words to this thing that is the very essence of himself. You know the Hebrew legend about the luz. The luz is this little bone. I think we spoke about it once. The little bone that we all have here in the top of our backbone. Don't try it. You have it. Believe me. And the legend goes that in this little bone, the essence of your being is kept. And this bone cannot be eradicated, cannot be crushed or burnt. And from this bone, the human being, the individual, will be recreated in time of resurrection. So it's really the condensed essence of ourselves. And I used to do a kind of a mental experiment years ago and to ask every person who was very relevant for me, who interested me, what is his or her luz? And I got beautiful answers. And Dovele wants his luz to become apparent to him. And he says he's not afraid of harsh verdicts, but yet I think he wants to get a more compassionate verdict. He wants to be looked at with sympathizing eyes. And the judge himself remembers that his late wife, Tamara, when she asked him, when she proposed to him to marry her, she proposed him, that she wanted him to marry her. She promised him to be a sympathetic witness to him, even a loving witness to him. And I thought, there should be a law legislated by every government that every person, every human being deserves to have one person in the world that will look at him in beautifying eyes, in sympathetic eyes, because so often we look at each other with either uglifying eyes or demonizing eyes or just indifferent eyes. And if you have someone who looks at you in such a way, suddenly I think of a story, a children's story about Moomin Troll. Moomin Troll of Tova Jensen, the Moomins, these legendary creatures who live somewhere in the valleys of Finland. And they played together, Moomin Troll and his friends. And suddenly there was a big black hat there. And they were playing, how do you say, machboim? Seek and hide, I think.
Hide and seek.
Hide and seek. And he jumped into this hat and he hid there. And they were looking for him and looking and didn't find him. So he came out, but the hat was the hat of a magician who alters everyone who enters it. And he came out totally different from what he was, and they do not recognize him. His brothers, his sisters, his friends, and they are rejected from him, and they are afraid from him. And he says, look, it's me. And they think that he devoured Moomin Troll, their beloved friend and brother. And suddenly his mother enters the room. And he begs her with his looks, because he cannot speak anymore, that she will recognize him. And she looks at him and she says, this is my Moomin Troll, the Moomin Troll Sheli. And at that moment, the stranger peeled out of him and he became himself again. And I think it teaches us about the role of a good and tuned and loving gaze, that we can look at someone and by the very look we suggest for him or for her the option of being better than what he seems to most people. And if this option is formulated, then he can be this other, better human being. Immediately, I think of Metamorphosis of Kafka when he was, when his mother for the first time saw him like this huge insect. And she looks at him and she says, "Oh God," and she goes back some steps and she leans on a table and she almost faints. And I always think, had she only looked at him with this beautifying look of the mother of Moomintroll, all reality would have been different. All Kafka would be, so maybe it's good that she did not look at him that way.
But what's interesting is that actually the judge that he asks didn't look at him. In the moment in childhood, he failed to look at him, he refused to look at him, and it is never clear in the book whether, how, to what degree Dov remembers that. But the judge himself, who comes and whose eyes we are watching this all through, although sometimes you forget that because we become so absorbed in Dov's voice, it keeps taking over, but then we return, we realize we're watching this from the Avishai, the judge's prayer. He is coming out of a position of guilt that he failed to see or recognize or be curious or be interested or care in the moment of this person's life that was most critical.
Yeah, but the thing is that even if he feels guilty, Avishai, the judge, for collaborating with the general indifference regarding Dovale when they were in the camp, or even when he was witnessing how other children almost tortured Dovale and harassed him and abused him before the news of the funeral came. And he collaborated by turning a blind eye to this cruelty, brutality. And yet, as the story unfolds, the judge realizes that even though Dovale is telling the story to the audience, he is not accusing the judge. And suddenly there is another space, a space where there is guilt, but the judge is not entrapped in the position of the one to be blamed. And if you are not blamed, maybe you become more free, you can move more freely within the situation.
It becomes a surprise to him because the whole tension in the beginning that he comes and he comes on the defensive, that he feels he'll be singled out for that. Yeah. And then I had this feeling as you were telling the story of precariousness, the precariousness of everything that's happening in that room. The judge feels that at any moment he could be singled out. We never know whether Dovale is going to lose the audience or not. We never know what's going to happen and if this whole thing is going to kind of shatter. And I wondered to what degree you felt that when Dov enters the bar that night, whether he knows he's going to tell that story or whether it is something that happens.
Yeah. You know, in Hebrew we have a phrase, lehenot me'asafek, to benefit or to enjoy the doubt. And even myself, when I was writing it, I prefer to enjoy the doubt, not knowing, because when you enjoy the doubt, both options are active simultaneously. But the moment when the story erupts from Dovale is also a kind of unexpected moment, because there is in the crowd, in the audience, there is a lady. She's a little younger than Dovale, and she's a borderliner. She's a very small lady, and she lives in a village for people like me. She says it, and she came to the performance. She didn't know that Dovale is there. She thought stand-up is a kind of karaoke. And she stand, and from the moment he entered the stage, her jaw fell, and she was staring at him. And he, you know, with all his firework of witness and jokes and all that, suddenly starts to feel that in the audience there is a kind of an extra way, something heavier than the other members of the audience. I think actors are very sensitive to someone like that. In the whole audience, they can trace the one who is reluctant, who is suspiciously looking at them, who doubt them. And after a while, he traces her, and he looks at her, and he does not recognize her, exactly as the judge beforehand did not recognize him from childhood. He does not recognize her. And then she tells him that they were neighbors. She used to live nearby him in the neighborhood of Romema in Jerusalem. And he says, why don't you laugh? Aren't my jokes good? And she said, no, they are evil. And then she says, after a while, she says another thing. She said, but you were a good boy. אבל היית ילד טוב. And these, but you were a good boy, 5 words, they crack him open. You know, I once interviewed a guy who works in breaking rocks. And he told me that sometimes you get a rock that you can work on for hours and you are unable to break it. But if you find the point, the real accurate point, it breaks open. And this naive and primal and innocent remark of her, but you were a good boy, it breaks him open because suddenly he was able to understand the way he did in remoting himself from himself. He could have felt the layers of vulgarity and cynicism and aggression that he had to put on himself in order, as I said before, to protect himself. And she comes, this lady, this childlike lady, who cannot understand jokes, because children do not understand jokes. I remember myself as a child, the grown-ups are talking jokes above my head, and almost in every joke there is someone who is being deceived or humiliated or damaged in any way, and everybody is laughing, and I'm stuck with the agony of this poor guy in the joke, and she's like that. There's only one joke that makes her very, very happy and laugh. It's about a turtle comes to the police station and wants to report about an assault. He said, I was assaulted, I was attacked by 2 snails. So the policeman said, okay, can you describe what happened? And he said, I cannot, everything happened so fast. and this... Maybe we should just tell jokes instead of being so serious.
I did love the image I had of you collecting jokes while you wrote this book, and how many people must have told you jokes that they hope would go in the book.
People are telling jokes. Yes, sometimes people who tell jokes, they think it's a proof of having sense of humor. It's not always the same. Sometimes it's even contradictory, especially with obsessive jokes tellers. But you know how it is. When we write a book, suddenly all the world becomes like a hermetic system of the theme we are writing about. The world suggests itself and directs itself to what you are writing about right now. So when I was writing about the Shoah, the whole world, I categorized people to couples and to victims and all the time. And when I wrote about love, it was the same. And whenever I write about a topic, suddenly all the world is very responsive to that. And so it was with jokes. People came and told me jokes all the time, and I wrote them. Now, the funny thing is the book came out in some other countries already and in Israel, and people keep sending me letters with suggestions for new jokes to insert into the book. By the way, the only joke that is not concluded in the book is the one that starts with the horse walks into a bar.
I wanted to say one thing about the character, this woman who's called
Pitts. That's her nickname, yeah.
Which is that I think she's the one who introduces this compassionate gaze that you were talking about, and it feels that without her presence, I don't know that the judge would have ever been able to provide that. Then she's the turning point for that, but she's also, when you say cracks dove open, I think everyone who has ever been on the stage knows the experience of what happens when someone that you know comes in the audience, like a family member or a friend, and it's actually terrible because then you're not free because they know you. And they know that the person up there is not the same, or you feel not the same. Yeah. And I think that this presence of this woman who knew him as a child, which is this person who's under all of these layers, her presence is at first an irritant for him because he can't perform in front of that. And then slowly it becomes the thing that allows for something else to happen.
Because of her softness and sympathizing look at him. Yeah, and because she reminded him of what he used to be and of what he might be, maybe, Yeah.
Are we allowed to ask what you're working on now?
I started another writing, which is totally different from this book. Let's say the story in me we befriend suspiciously and slowly. But it's okay. I mean, you know this phase, this amazing phase of the beginning when really it's such a good way to understand infinity because everything can happen. You choose a character, and from this character sprouts other characters. And you still don't know which one of them you will follow, and you don't. I mean, every human situation contains so many options, and I write one option, and immediately I know that it's very clumsily written, very thickly written, and I will have to write and rewrite until I will go to the nucleus of it, and from then I'll go backward and start to describe it from other points of view. And I know now, and you know it, of course, when we write, and both of us like to write also about writers, or at least we like to write about a situation when someone tells another someone a story. And I know for myself why do I like it. It is because when you tell a story, very soon you realize that there is another story underneath it. And there is another story, and another, and another. And this is the human archaeology. There are so many stories in every given situation. And we, because we are practical and functional people, we have to congeal in one story. But stories which are alive, they have the eternal pulse in them, the pulse of the multi-layeredness, so to say. And I also thought regarding this book, the horse book, that how shall I say? Every one of us, we have a kind of an official story, a visit card story that we introduce or present to others, to foreign strangers that we meet, or even to people that we know, or when we go to psychology treatment. We tell our official story. But then maybe if we are lucky and we have a good listener, a sympathetic witness, who will make us tell not only the official story, but the story underneath it, and underneath it, and will force us to give up on the protection of the official story that became like a trap and even like a prison for us, because we were stuck in the place or in the time when this story was formulated inside us. But maybe we are in a totally different place in life. Maybe we do not need this story. Maybe it's a kind of, how do you say, a peel that we can peel from ourselves and get rid of it and not allow it to block us and to paralyze us. And I say it, and I think that it applies not only to individuals, it applies also for societies and to nations and to countries. And sometimes you can look at a country, as I look at Israel, and you see how we are trapped in a situation that maybe had we been more courageous, more clever, less terrified of life, maybe we would have been able just to tell ourselves a new story, another story. Now, a new story can be frightening because we still have not developed the defense mechanism that we feel are needed in order to protect us. But I think the power of a good story is that it does not protect us. Stories should not protect us. Stories should expose us and bring us into a more tight contact with our life.
Do you still feel exposed when you publish your books?
Yes, and I want to be exposed. Yeah, I think being exposed brings very good things. Of course, it brings also pain, and there are some bad people outside there. But it's the tax that I have to pay in order to be exposed. Yes, don't you when you write?
Of course. Yeah. But we're exposing you right now. Somebody in I have the audience questions here for you. And there's one question about, there's many questions about humor. One is, who is your favorite comedian?
Who is my
favorite comedian?
Well, my primal comedian, the first time I read a humorist was when I read Shalom Aleichem when I was 9 years old, and I was totally taken and fascinated by him, and he really changed my life, I can say it. I think because of him I'm a writer. He was the first one to teach me how you can create a whole world through stories and words. And
he brought you to have your first audience, no? Because you were on the radio, no? Because of the contest?
Yeah, there was... Shall I tell this story?
Yeah.
It's a funny story, yeah? I was 8 years old, and my father came to me with the book of Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem is a Jewish humorist who lived in the end of the 19th, the beginning of the 20th century. He died here in New York. Wonderful humorist and wonderful writer who described the life of the shtetlach, the little townlets of the Jews in Galicia, in East Europe. And my father was such a child in one of these shtetlach, in Dinov, in Poland. Nobody from Dinov here? No, okay. And he rarely spoke about his childhood. And one day he came and he gave me this thick red volume of the stories of Shalom Aleichem, and he said, "Take it, David." At home I'm David. "Take it, David. This is how it used to be over there." When I was a child, people were unable to utter the words Poland or Germany. They said over there. Even today, by the way, I noticed that when a Jew is talking about the Shoah, he will always talk about what happened over there, and when a non-Jew will talk, he will or she will say what happened then. Now, it seems a very minor difference between there and then. It's very, very crucial, because then it means that it happened, it had happened, and it's over, done, no more. There, it indicates that maybe in some parallel reality, it's still an option. And I started to read it, and I was the book of Shalom Aleichem. It was the story about Motel, the son of Pesi, the cantor. I was fascinated. I mean, there was a whole world that I didn't know anything about. And the language of Shalom Aleichem with the translation of Yudalet Berkovich was so different from all the adventures books that I used to read until then. I felt like a child today reads Harry Potter for the first time, and a whole dimension of reality opens up for him. And I read it. Even there were not numbers, digits of the pages, but letters, like in the Bible or the Talmud. And I was sure that I got the treasure, because no one I knew read the stories of Shalom Aleichem when at this age. And I read it, and I inhaled it, and I created a kind of a diasporic enclave amidst the Israeli life, the very Israeli, the very militant, strong, tuned to the future life of Israel of the beginning of the 60s. And then, just to end this story, there was a national competition of knowledge contest in the Israeli radio. We did not have television by then. So I told my parents, I want to go, I know. And they said, "Oh, come on, you are 9 years old, stay at home, please." So I went to the Galanteria in the neighborhood where we lived, and I bought for the first time a postcard, and it was the first postcard I wrote. I don't know how I knew how to write, and I said that I want to be auditioned. Sure enough, a week later came a letter from the governmental authority of the radio asking me to be auditioned. My parents almost really fainted. It was like David Ben-Gurion himself points at me and says, "Give me your son, your only one, the one you love." And so I went I went there with my father, and we entered the place, and they said, "Oh no, the boy should stay outside." And my father said, "No, the boy is the thing." So and they started to audition me, and I had then a very good memory, not anymore, unfortunately, but I knew I knew all the writing by heart. So there started to be a problem. And the General Assembly of the radio, the directors, they gathered, and there was a big quarrel, which I learned of only years later, because they said it will be non-educational that such a young child will win such a high money prize. It was something like $200 of then. And instead of that, they suggested me a deal that I will sit in the studio in the time when they air the program with the grown-ups competitors, and when someone of them will not know the answer, they will turn to me. and it sounds like a story, but this is how it was. And this is how I started my radio career from the age of 9 until I was 37, and I loved every moment of it.
And I thought of that, because I thought from a very early age, you always had this invisible audience. I mean, it's changed now, but when you're on radio too, you were performing, and the audience was there, and you couldn't see them, and nothing.
Yeah, but it's different. When we write a book, it is different, because even, yes, in the beginning, of course, I'm aware that there is an audience, and I know now that there will be some people who will read it, but then after a while, what counts is really the magnetic field of the story itself. This is the audience, you are judged there, and you audition there, and you are only tuned to what happens between the people in the story. This is why I so much love long processes of writing, because it allows me to clean myself from this knowledge that there are people out there, and to surrender to the story. I think it's a key word, to surrender to the story. So many times when I was writing, I was struggling with the characters until I suddenly said, no, they do not have to surrender to me. I have to surrender to the option of Dovele inside me, or the option of Ora into the end of the land. Just to let me melt into what she has to suggest to me.
Bernard will get angry if we don't take some more of these. So this one says, Dovele's story seems to mirror Ora's Into the End of the Land. Was that something that was on your mind when you wrote either of the novels?
Yeah, I think it mirrors, the story of Dovele mirrors the story of Ora, in the sense that both of them are trapped in a situation in which they use magical thinking, in which they believe that their thought will change reality. Because both of them are trapped in such an extreme, acute situation that they hold to everything that is at their reach, that can help them, that can save them. And so Ora decides that if she is not there to receive the notification of the notifiers of the army that will come and tell her about the death of her son, who is a soldier, then something will be changed in reality. The reality will be reversed until they find her for a minute or an hour. Now, it looks very small, a minute or an hour, but in such acute moments, every second counts. Yes, she believes that if she's able to reverse the wheel of events, she will really reverse reality. And Dovele, when he's going on this trip to the funeral of either Mama or Papa, he starts to believe that it's on him to decide. He does not want this responsibility, of course, but at the same time, he has no escape from it. And maybe the fact that he, in the end, gave a verdict of one of his parents, we shall not make a spoiler here, and the fact that what he has verdicted became real, became true, maybe because of that he is a stand-up comedian, because the heart of stand-up comedy is betrayal. This is the heart of a good stand-up comedy, because the comedian is baking his audience molding the audience in the shape that he wants the audience to be, and he creates all kind of slogans of identification that they all will feel like one big warm collective by the language he uses, by the passwords that he takes from lyrics, from television programs, from politicians. And then when they are all made as one tight collective, he goes out of the collective, he comes from an unexpected place, and he bites them, like a snake even. So the heart of good stand-up comedy is betrayal, is to show your audience that they are wrong, that they do not know really what life they are living, that they are camouflaging their life. And maybe, as I said, because of the betrayal, that he betrayed Mama or Papa, he became a stand-up comedian, but also because of the fact that if once in your life you took such deadly responsibility of verdicting someone to death, you might become afraid of your own thought. You might become afraid that what you think will become reality. On the one hand, it can be tempting. On the other hand, if you are traumatized, it's terrible. So you never want to be on the same spot. You never want to commit yourself to one place. You have all the time to surprise yourself. Here you see me, here you don't. You know, never to oblige yourself to one point because it might come true. And this is also the heart of stand-up comedy, also the way he moves on stage. He's all the time in movement. He cannot stand. And when I write, I told you that I need physically to feel what my characters do. And I will do everything they do, except one thing that I don't know to do. He walks on his hands. As a child, he walks on his hands, which is also a way to look at things differently. Because when you walk on your hands, you really see the world differently. This is something I cannot do, to walk. But all the other things, I really enjoy it, you know, to act like him.
That part about his particular magical thinking and the way that he believes for this moment that he is somehow in control of who will live and who will die between his parents was particularly moving to me, because I think it's so true about children that they have this sense of omnipotence, and it gives them enormous power and imagination, but it also puts them in the danger of enormous sense of guilt. And I mean, I have two boys who are 8 and 11, and I see that all the time in children. They can't quite calculate the ways in which they are or are not responsible for what happens in the adult world. And my younger son just told me a dream he had in which he had to play a little game, and he had to pass a ball, and the ball had to come back to him very hard in the stomach, and then he had to make a goal. And if he could do it, he could save the universe. And if he couldn't, then he saved the universe, and then the dream was sad because he had to say goodbye to this friend with whom he had this connection. But that sense, I think, that a child has, that if a tiny little thing, if you can catch the ball the right way, this magical thinking, which is so central to their lives, we think of it in a kind of positive way, but actually it has this darker side, which is guilt. And when I read that, when I was in that car with him, with the parents screaming at him, each one saying, "Take me, take me," I felt that very strongly. We have time for another question? Bernard? I don't know where he is. I like this question. I love how, it says here, I love how both of you use sex in your novels. How do you decide how and when to employ it? I don't think I ever write about sex.
How do we decide?
For you. How do you decide how and when to employ it?
And when to?
Employ it, to use it. When do you decide, how and when do you decide to write about sex in your novels?
That's the word I missed, yeah. Yeah.
And then it says, so the question is like this, and then there's a small arrow that says, and romantic love.
And romantic love. When you create a world in writing, you create the wholeness of world. Mm-hmm. Part of it is sex. It's quite difficult to describe sex in Hebrew. It's a problem. Mm-hmm. It is a problem. even the Rambam, the Maimonides, referred to that, and he said that we should not describe sex in Hebrew, maybe because it's a sacred language. But I think that the only time that there are twice that I wrote a sex scene, one in Be My Knife and one in To the End of the Land. And in To the End of the Land, I think I found the best way to be able to describe lovemaking between Ora and Avram, and it happens when Avram comes back from captivity, from the Egyptian captive, and he's totally broken, and he cannot perform with women. And Ora finds a way to tempt him by telling him what he cannot do, and what he cannot do to her. And step by step, she lures him, and I think she lures him because she uses something that is so creative that reminds him of himself before captivity. And creativity merges with sexual arousing for him, and then he is able to perform.
I had the impression that there are many more sex scenes in your book, but now that I'm thinking about it, I think it's because you're always writing about the world in a very sensual way, and I think sensuality has to do with being awake physically to the world. And I think there's always a sense in your characters of this tasting, this hearty tasting of the world, and being awake to what it feels like and what it smells like. Even in this very unsexy room, this basement comedy, bar, whatever it is, you can smell everything, and you feel, you sense the atmosphere, you sense everybody's breath there, and I think maybe that's part of what gives that impression, because you don't shy away from the physicality.
On the contrary, I think I start from physically. I cannot write a character unless I know him or her totally. I know what does it mean to be in him or her body, and how he moves, and how she eats, and how she makes love. And
I never understand that about you. For me, my characters are totally bodiless in some sense until somehow something happens.
But they are very concrete. Yet there are many ways to concretize characters.
I never come at it the same way. But I sometimes will sit at my desk and think of you and think I must be doing it wrong, because I don't know what she walks like. I don't know what he looks. I still to this day have no idea really what, I don't know, Leo Gursky looks like. I know what he feels like.
I know how he looks like. I read your book and I know how he looks like, yeah.
Yeah, but I know, I feel it from the inside, and I can't often see them at all from the outside. We have to
but I think you convey something, you know. When Gorsky tells about his naked model, yes, immediately you see them there with his kneidalach, as you call them, yeah.
Okay, this is the last question, and it's a nice one. Your writing is so specifically Israeli, contemporary Israeli, post-1948 Israeli, and yet it speaks of the universality of humans. How do you do it?
Thank you to whoever asked this question.
How do you do it, is the question.
Well, when I write, believe me, I don't think of universality when I write. I write, I'll tell you the story that I once told you, but I cannot help not telling it, because I think it answers. When I wrote the book of Intimate Grammar, it's a book about a small family in Jerusalem before the Six-Day War. It's a small symbiotic family, like my family used to be. And when I finished writing it, I felt it's only fair that my parents will read it before others read it. So I printed it out and I gave it for them to read, and my father read it, and he said, well, it's a nice book, David, but do you think anyone out of our family can understand it? And I thought it's so sweet of him to say that, because, I mean, he really touched the heart of the matter. And now whenever there is a new translation from Chinese or Finnish or Slovakian of this book, I come to him and I say, you see, Abba, they have understood. So I mean, I want my books to be both, to be universal, but that my father will always think that only our family can understand. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you very much. Thank you.